Well, we're going to start now. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce in the UK, I'd like to give you a very warm welcome to this webinar on the highly requested topic, hiring staff from overseas. Just a quick disclaimer that we will be recording the session and it will be shared with all the attendees following the webinar. Today, we are delighted to be joined by IAS. IAS is a UK leading provider of personal and corporate immigration services, specializing in relocating staff and businesses to the UK and also overseas. Having been established for 13 years, they have rapidly grown to become one of the most widely used and trusted corporate immigration providers, with over 150 staff in the company and also 60 legal caseworkers. IAS has the capacity to take on all corporate contracts from small boutique businesses to large multinational organizations. Also, IAS can also assist with immigration matters of other countries, such as the US, Australia, Ireland, Spain, or Portugal. And their immigration services ensure a seamless experience when relocating staff, not only in the UK, but also overseas. I'm pleased to say that today we have with us an expert in this matter, Jason, who has 12 years experience after working for UKVI as a caseworker and who became Office of the Immigration Services Commissioner, regulated in 2016. We really hope you enjoy today's session, and if you have any questions, please do submit it in the question and answer function we have here in Zoom, and they will be answered by Jason at the end. So whenever you want, Jason, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for the introduction and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining today. So the purpose of today's webinar is to kind of give a brief, well, not brief, but an overview of the system for hiring foreign workers in the UK. We'll go into some detail on some areas. So the presentation should take about 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A afterwards as well. So any questions you've got or that come to mind during the presentation, you can just pop them in the Q&A section and then we'll try to get to as many as possible at the end. Okay, so an overview to begin with then. So the process for hiring staff in the UK. So this webinar is mainly aimed at the skilled worker visa. Towards the end, I'll kind of cover some of the other routes, but the main working route in the UK is this skilled worker visa. So an overview of the way that system works. So first of all, there needs to be a company in the UK. So obviously there's a UK-based company, they're registered within the UK. That company has to obtain, so they apply for and obtain a sponsor license from the Home Office. So it's not something where you're just kind of applying and to sponsor one individual. The company itself has to apply for that sponsor license and make an application themselves to the Home Office in the UK or UKVI. Once a company's got a sponsor license, the Home Office will give them access to something called a sponsor management system. So that system has been in place for quite a long time. So whichever individual that the company has nominated within the application, they will gain access to something called the sponsor management system. So within that sponsor management system, the company can then request and assign something called certificates of sponsorship. So again, as I said before, the sponsor license, that's for the company to sponsor as many people as they can justify the company needing. So it's not just one application for one individual. You can request and assign as many of these certificates of sponsorship as you can justify needing to the Home Office. So whenever need arises within the company, you can request these from the Home Office and then you can apply to sponsor an individual for the role. Once the certificate of sponsorship has been assigned to an individual, that individual can then apply for a skilled worker visa. So this is something that the company can help an individual with, but theoretically it's the individual's responsibility once they've got that sponsorship certificate. So before we get into the details of the sponsor license, so there have been, I'm sure you've all heard things, so there have been quite a few recent changes to the skilled worker system that have affected companies quite a lot. So just to kind of run through a few of these changes and challenges that companies are facing. So the main one has been the increase in the salary threshold. So up until these changes in April, the minimum general salary threshold that a company would have to meet was £26,200 per year. Some roles were above this. So you had kind of higher skilled roles that would have a higher threshold, but the general minimum was 26,200. So as you can see by the slide, it has increased quite significantly to 38,700. So that 38,700 is now a general minimum salary threshold. And again, there are a lot of minimum salaries for particular jobs that have increased in line with that. So you have some jobs where you need to be paid 60, 70,000 pounds per year on the back of that rise. So as you can imagine, it's had quite an effect on a lot of companies that do have a sponsor license already and companies that were planning to apply for a sponsor license because a lot of jobs that they were sponsoring for they can't justify paying that kind of salary. So it has affected quite a lot of businesses since the beginning of April. Another big change they made. So within the skilled worker route, we have the health and care worker visa. So it's been a very popular visa since that was brought in. So a lot of people have been either coming over to the UK to work as care workers within care homes or home care. And it's also been a popular route for students who studied in the UK to switch on to the skilled worker route. They may have graduated from a bachelor's or a master's degree and then been sponsored as a care worker, because obviously that leads to settlement in the end. So it's a route that they've taken if they found it difficult to obtain sponsorship within their field. So one of the changes they made is that they are no longer allowing people to bring dependent family members to the UK if you're in the UK as a care worker. So again, the government, in an attempt to try and cut down on the net migration figures, they've targeted care workers and those who wanted to bring family members in the future. And they've also changed the shortage occupation list. So within the immigration rules, we had a shortage occupation list, which it gave a general 20% discount to jobs that were on this shortage list. So every job that was listed on there, they could be paid 20% less than the going rate for that job. This has now been changed to something called an immigration salaries list. So it has significantly reduced the amount of jobs that are on that list. It's something that they're reviewing constantly, adding and removing jobs as the need arises. And they've also, rather than it being a blanket 20% discount, they've reduced that so that it's per particular job now. So they'll set a minimum salary, a minimum lower salary per job that's on that list. So basically what that means is that if the role you want to sponsor for is on the immigration salaries list, instead of needing to be paid 38,700, they will list a lower rate that you can be paid on that list if that job is a shortage job. They've also made things a little bit more complex in terms of the salary options. So you can basically obtain points for different scenarios where you may be able to be paid less than the general salary threshold. I'll go through these a little bit later in the presentation. But yeah, they've increased the amount of those, which is making things a little bit more difficult for people to understand. For the individual, they've also increased the immigration health surcharge. So generally speaking, a company will sponsor somebody for 3 years initially. So this immigration health surcharge is something that is paid per year that you're being sponsored for. So this has risen from £624 per year to £1,035 per year. So again, this usually isn't a charge that the company will pay for the individual. So it's very expensive for the individual to obviously pay that when they make their visa application. So yeah, a lot of companies are finding that the individual obviously can't afford the, you know, £4,000 or £5,000 fee when they first apply. Um, Another point, obviously I mentioned the sponsor management system before. It's quite an old system, so it's quite difficult to navigate. So a lot of companies we do find have a lot of queries and come to us for help with that sponsor management system. So another challenge they face is managing that sponsor management system once they've got a sponsor license. So going back to the UK company, what they have to do first. So like I said previously, they have to first obtain a sponsor license from the Home Office. So in making that application, the main things that the Home Office will look at is that you are a genuine organisation, you're operating lawfully in the UK. You must be an honest, dependable, and reliable employer. So what this means is the Home Office will look to see whether you have the systems in place, HR systems, to be able to comply with the requirements as a sponsor once you've obtained that sponsor license. So you do have ongoing duties to keep records and report things to the Home Office. So they do check, and they may even carry out a visit before they grant the license to make sure you're able to comply with these. They will also, so if you're applying for the sponsor license for the skilled worker visa, you also have to prove that you can offer genuine employment. You're not just creating a role for the purposes of immigration. So the Home Office will check that the company does have a genuine business need for that position. So obviously you may get some scenarios where somebody has applied for a sponsor license because they want a friend to obtain a visa for the UK, just for example. So the Home Office are quite stringent in making sure that there is a genuine business need for the role that you're wanting to sponsor for. Another point is that we do get some inquiries where individuals are looking to apply for a sponsor license, maybe to sponsor a nanny or an au pair, childminder, something like that. So an individual can't obtain a sponsor license. So it has to be a company. The caveat to that is that a sole trader can obtain a sponsor license. So a sole trader is obviously it's slightly different to a limited company. If you have a business registered in your name, you can still apply for a sponsor license. But again, goes back to there needing to be a genuine job there. So how to apply for a sponsor license. So the process with the Home Office is that an online application form is completed to begin with. So within the application form, you're telling the Home Office all about the company, what sector you operate in, people who work for the company, the hours of operation, and what role that you're looking to sponsor for as well. That can be included in there. That does help the application. Once you complete and submit the application form, the Home Office will require documentary evidence from the company. So this can include things like, as you can see from the slide, it can include employer's liability insurance, business bank statements, lease for the business premises, client contracts to show that you've got the work coming in. And also you'll have to provide an organizational chart if the company is of a certain size as well. So that would be a hierarchy chart of directors, managers, and staff. And it also helps to show where the role you want to sponsor for will fit within that chart as well. So as mentioned previously, so once the sponsor license is approved, you obtain access to the sponsor management system. So you'll be given login details for that. You'll nominate people who will have access to that. So you have something called an authorizing officer on a license. They're usually the person who's highest within the company, mainly responsible for recruitment. So they'll be the authorizing officer, and they'll be responsible for the license overall. You'll then nominate people to be level 1 users. So they gain access to the sponsor management system. They can assign certificates of sponsorships to individuals, request them, carry out reporting duties. They get full access as a level 1 user. So as a licensed sponsor, the company, as I mentioned previously, they will have certain duties and responsibilities to keep up with during the life of a sponsor license. So the main one that the Home Office will look at is record keeping. So like I said, they will be checking HR systems, make sure that you have the ability to keep these records as they do need to. So you'll be required to keep copies of things like the right to work check that you've done for an employee, their immigration documents, details, their home address, contact details. Another example might be if you sponsor somebody whilst they're working as a student, you'll need things like timetables for their university classes, just as an example. And you'll also have reporting duties. So that sponsor management system will allow you to report changes to a sponsored worker during their sponsorship. So an example of this might be if you find that you're sponsoring an individual and they don't turn up for work for 2 weeks consecutively. You've not given them permission to be off work. You might be wondering what to do. You're sponsoring this person, they've not turned up. This is something that you do have to go on and report to the Home Office. So you go onto that sponsor management system, and within 10 working days, you'd have to report that they're absent without permission. Another example might be if somebody's salary has changed. Maybe you've given them a pay rise. So the job's the same, but you've given them a pay rise. You would have to go onto the system, and you would have to report that to the Home Office as well. So everything should be done within 10 working days, if possible. And just in a kind of wider sense, you obviously have to comply with the wider UK employment law as well. So failure to comply with these duties and reporting duties. So for example, if a company had the license and they were reporting changes after 20 working days, and this was consistent, when the Home Office do visit the company, it could result in the sponsor license being downgraded, suspended, or even revoked. So they are quite serious, and especially recently, they are quite strict with the punishment they give out to companies who don't comply with these. So like I said previously, you do allocate certificates of sponsorship to individuals. So there's 2 types of certificate of sponsorship. So you have undefined certificates of sponsorship. So these are for people who are already inside the UK, and they do also apply to some other working routes as well, such as temporary creative worker routes. You've got the international sports person route. So these undefined certificates of sponsorship, the company will have an annual allocation of those. So they will say to the Home Office, we need 10 for the next 12 months. And like I say, you can allocate those under the skilled worker route. They'd be allocated to people inside the UK. So that might be people switching from another visa, or it could be somebody extending a visa. So you might already have somebody sponsored and you're looking to extend their visa. So that would come from this annual allocation of undefined certificates. If you do use all of these within that 12 months, it is something you can request more of. As I mentioned previously, it's just about justifying it to the Home Office. So if you used all of your allocation, you would apply to the Home Office and say, we need 6 more for these particular roles, and this is when I'm looking for them to start, and then hopefully they will grant you those 6 more certificates. So we also have defined certificates of sponsorship as well. So these are used for people who are outside the UK. So these don't come with an annual allocation. these are just requested as and when you need them. So if you, as a company, if you had a sponsor license and you identified an individual overseas who you wanted to fill a particular role, you would go onto the sponsor management system and you would request a defined certificate specifically for that person. So you put their details in, details of the role, job description, and then you would make the application. Historically, they've taken about 1 day for a decision. More recently, they've been taking longer. The Home Office have been asking for more documents to prove that you need this person as a company. So it is something that can take a little bit of time for a decision, but you do request those as and when you need them for an individual. Again, a bit more detail on certificates of sponsorship. So these certificates are created and assigned within that sponsor management system. So there are some mandatory information that goes on a certificate of sponsorship. So just to kind of run over a few briefly, it's not everything, but the main ones would be details of the worker. So, name, the job you're looking to sponsor them for, the salary, the hours that they're going to be working, because the Home Office obviously have to work all of this out, and whether you meet the points requirements for the visa. So the start date on a certificate should be no more than 3 months after the date of when the certificate is assigned, essentially. So you can't assign a certificate to somebody and the start date be in 6 months. The start date would have to be within 3 months of when you're assigning that certificate. And just another kind of brief point is that you need to make sure that the certificate of sponsorship has not been used in a previous application as well. So you will find that some companies have assigned a certificate to somebody. The individual has made an application. The application might have been refused, and then they've applied again with the same certificate of sponsorship. So that can't happen. So you'd have to issue a new certificate of sponsorship for the new application. So to be granted a skilled worker visa, you'd need as an individual. So like I say, once you've assigned that certificate of sponsorship to somebody, the individual then needs to make an application. So within the application, the person would need to satisfy the Home Office that you're being sponsored to undertake a genuine vacancy and are capable of undertaking the role for which your certificate of sponsorship has been assigned. So what that means is the Home Office do check whether people are able to carry out the role. So just as an example, if you were sponsoring somebody as an electrical engineer and the person had only ever had experience and jobs within a healthcare sector, for example, then the Home Office would obviously pick up on that and say that you're not an individual who's able to carry out this role. So it has to be that the individual can prove that they can carry out the role that you're sponsoring them for as well. And again, if there's reasonable grounds for the Home Office to believe that the job you're being sponsored for does not exist, or it's being created mainly so that you can bring somebody to the UK, and there's no genuine business need there, then the Home Office will refuse the application. So this is something that they will check quite thoroughly. And the Home Office will also want to be satisfied that you've not entered into an arrangement whereby you'll fill a temporary or permanent position, which is for another company and not your actual sponsor. So this means, so you do get a lot of recruitment agencies, for example, or care worker agencies who may have a sponsor license and they want to sponsor somebody to send out to another, to a care home or to work in a hospital, using healthcare as an example. But that can't happen. So you can only sponsor people for, in conjunction with the running of your business. So if you were an agency, you couldn't hire somebody, a nurse, and then send them to another hospital to work. You would have to be sponsoring, an office administrator or an office manager to work for your recruitment company. It's in direct connection with the running of your business. You're not sending them to carry out a role for another company. So we have seen a lot of licenses revoked and suspended on that basis. So it's something to be aware of if if you were a recruitment agency looking for a sponsor license. So going into the into the detailed requirements then for the skilled worker visa. So to qualify for the visa, the individual must score 70 points. So the first three requirements are mandatory, and you would obtain 50 points from those mandatory requirements. And then the fourth requirement regarding salaries, there's different options for that, which I'll cover in a minute. So the mandatory requirements, first of all, for your first 20 points is sponsorship. So it's quite obvious. And so the certificate of sponsorship has been assigned to an individual by an employer that has a sponsor license. So it's, like I say, it's quite obvious, that one. So the job must be at an appropriate skill level. So this means that the job must be listed as a job that you can be sponsored for, essentially. So the immigration rules have something called appendix skilled occupations. So your job must be listed within there as a job you can be sponsored for. There's obviously certain lower skilled jobs that you can't actually be sponsored for. So that's 40 points. And then the next 10 points that make up the 50 come from the English language requirement. So there's three different ways you meet that. So either an individual will complete an English test to the correct level. So this must be to at least level B1. The most popular test people do is an IELTS test. So that would be IELTS general training, for example, to obtain that level B1. Another way you can meet it is that you've got a degree. So if this was a degree from the UK, that would meet that requirement automatically. If it was a degree from overseas, but it was taught in English, you can obtain a certificate of comparability from a company called ECTIS. So they will basically assess the degree that you've obtained and will give a certificate to say that this is the equivalent to this particular level of English. And then another one is obviously if you're from a majority English speaking country, US, Canada, Australia, for example, then your passport is enough to meet that English language requirement. So the next 20 points, they do come from different options for salaries. So an applicant can only be awarded points if the salary can meet the minimum level set under the options of A to K, which do come within Appendix Skilled Worker of the immigration rules. So there's now, like I said at the start of the presentation, there's now an increased number of these options, salary options. So these came in because of the changes in April. So like I said, they have different lower salary options for different circumstances. And there's also different lower salary options for if you're already on the skilled worker route prior to the changes. So they haven't increased the minimum salary thresholds for people who are already here on the skilled worker visa. So we'll kind of go through the options quickly. So option A is the main requirement. So the minimum general salary threshold of 38,700. And each occupation, so we have standard occupation codes assigned to each job role. So each standard occupation code has what they call a going rate. So that's basically a minimum salary for that particular job. So whichever one is the higher of the going rate or the minimum threshold of 38,700, that's what you have to meet to meet the requirements of option A. So for example, if you had a marketing director whose going rate was 50,000, and then you've got the general minimum, which is 38,700, that marketing director would have to meet the 50,000 because it's obviously higher than the general minimum threshold. So option D, we've got the applicant is being sponsored for a job that's listed on the immigration salaries list. So that was previously known as the shortage occupation list. So if it's listed on that, they do have particular going rates for each job listed on there. And then they do have a minimum of 30,960. So it's obviously quite a bit less than the 38,700. So you'd either have to meet the 30,960 or the lower going rate listed on the immigration salaries list. Option E is that the applicant is a new entrant, and this basically a new entrant is somebody who is under the age of 26. They're switching from a student visa or a graduate visa. So they're able to be paid as little as 30,960 or 70% of the going rate, whichever one is the higher. So with everything, you've got that general minimum, and then you've got the going rates, and then you must be paid whichever one is the higher of the two. So again, new entrants can be paid as little as 30,960 in most cases. So as I mentioned previously, there are other routes for workers. So they're all specific. So the skilled worker visa covers most jobs, so scenarios. But obviously, you do have particular sectors where they do have a specific visa. So one of those is the Global Business Mobility visa. So that covers quite a range, to be honest. You've got the Senior or Specialist Worker visa. So that's usually where somebody senior within a company overseas might want to transfer to the UK for a short period of time. You know, maybe they've got an assignment in the UK with the UK company for a year, and they might, if you are a senior or you're a specialist and you earn a certain salary, you can be transferred over to the UK branch for a limited period. The graduate trainee visa, it's kind of self-explanatory. You got the UK expansion worker visa. So this has been quite a popular visa. It used to be called a sole representative visa. So that's where you have somebody who is, the owner or a senior within an overseas company, and they're looking to expand to the UK. So they're looking to open a branch in the UK. So this visa works a little bit differently to any other, really. So with the UK expansion worker visa, a company outside the UK would apply for a sponsor license themselves. So any other visa, it has to be a company in the UK applying for a sponsor license. But with the expansion worker, the overseas company can apply for that license and then sponsor an individual to come to the UK to start that branch in the UK. And then they can sponsor more workers to come over once they've opened and started trading in the UK. So that's a good one and that's for a maximum of 2 years. And then if somebody wanted to stay beyond that 2 years, you would have to then look at the skilled worker visa. And yeah, and then you've got the service supply visa. So that's for certain contracts that under international trade law. So it's quite a complex route, that one. So you have to, if there's contracts between a UK company and overseas company, it has to fall within particular trade agreements. And you've got tier 2 ministers of religion. So obviously a lot of religious organizations will require ministers from overseas. So that route is specifically for those ministers, and similar to the skilled worker visa, that's something that leads to settlement after 5 years. You got the international sports person visa. So this will cover, coaches, players from any sports at the highest level. Charity workers. So any registered charity in the UK, if they have a sponsor license, they can bring over people to work for up to 12 months as a volunteer in most cases. So that's quite a popular route for people as well, to come over to the UK and work for that charity for up to 12 months. Creative worker visa for musicians, for example. So that one again is temporary, covers things like fashion as well. You get quite a lot of models applying under the creative worker route. And then that's for up to 12 months as well. Government authorized exchange visa. So again, it's quite a complex visa, this one. It's you don't get many people going down this route. But if a company is within one of the government authorized exchange schemes, the individual can be sponsored by by that scheme. So rather than a company sponsoring somebody for that scheme, it has to be the actual government authorized exchange scheme that does the sponsoring. Then you've got seasonal workers. So that would be things like in the agriculture sector, so fruit picking, or the poultry sector. So it's for people who might come to the UK for 2 months of the year, for example, to work within fruit picking and work on farms. Religious workers. So they're, rather than that being for ministers of religion, this is for kind of more non-pastoral duties. So somebody coming to work for a religious order, carrying out things like care within that order, any non-pastoral duties, and then again that one is temporary. Okay, so fees. So the government obviously set fees for the applications every step of the way. So for a sponsor license application, the fee depends on the size of the company. So if a company has a turnover of at least 10.1 million and they've got more than 50 employees, you'd be classed as a large company. Anything under that is classed as a small company. So to actually submit your sponsor license application, the fee is £536 if you're a small company and £1,476 if you're a large company. So that's a one-off fee. So that's just for your application to the Home Office to become a sponsor. Once you've got that sponsorship, to assign a certificate of sponsorship, you would pay £239 for every certificate of sponsorship that you assign to an individual. At that point, you will also pay an immigration skills charge in most cases. So again, this differs between small and large companies, as you can see. So £364 per year that you're assigning a certificate for, if you're a small company, or £1,000 per year that you assign the certificate for if you're a large company. The individual then has to pay visa fees. So this is not something that the company has to pay for an individual. Obviously, a company can pay it for them if they were struggling, for example, but technically speaking, the individual is responsible for these fees. So their visa application fee differs if you're inside or outside the UK. So it's actually cheaper if you're outside the UK. So it's £719 if your sponsorship is anything up to 3 years, and £1,420 if you're being sponsored for more than 3 years. Inside the UK, it's 827 for up to 3 years and 1,636 if it was anything over that. And then the individual will also pay an immigration health surcharge. So like I say, this has risen quite significantly, and it is a problem that some individuals are facing because it is an expensive outlay when they make their application. So in most cases, like I said, you are sponsoring a person for 3 years. So you're paying 1,035 times 3 plus the application fee when an individual applies. Okay, that's everything. So in terms of the presentation, so I'll give you a couple of moments if you want to screenshot this screen. So that's my email address. The telephone number is not a direct line to me. That's just kind of the general line, but you can ask for me and obviously mention that you've attended this webinar. Ideally, if you could just email me directly at that email address, that'd be great. So if you do want any further advice or any further services from us, or set up a meeting to discuss these, pop me an email through to that email address, and we'll go from there. So yeah, I'll give you a couple of moments to either take that down or take a screenshot.
Thank you, Jason. That was a fantastic session. We will be sharing Jason details via email later this afternoon. So if any of you have more questions, you'll be able to send it to them directly. Now we have like 15 minutes for questions and answers. We have some in the chat now. If you want to start managing that, Jason.
Yeah, I'll just get that up.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I'll just go through from a few from the chat. We've got quite a few in there already. So there's no names attached to them. So I'll just kind of read the question. So somebody's asked, just to clarify, did you say that with the undefined certificate sponsorship, you'd need to decide how many certificates you need at the start of the year, and then that was fixed for the year? So when you apply for a sponsor license, you will initially state to the Home Office how many you're requesting when you apply for the license. If you do use those within a 12-month period, you can request more. So the Home Office has recently implemented an automatic renewal system. So previously you had to request renewals each year, but now they will automatically renew those every year based on how many you've used within the previous 12 months. But like I say, you can make a request within that year to obtain some more, as long as you can justify to the Home Office that you need them. So yeah, if you requested 5 when you made an application and you used all 5, you can request another 5, and then maybe you've used 10 within a 12-month period. That will then automatically renew for another 10 for the next year. So it does automatic renew based on how many you've used. So yeah, we have another one saying, how long does the whole process take from start to finish? So when a company in the UK applies for the sponsor license, that application itself, there's 2 different options. So you've got a standard option where you pay the standard fee, which I went through, and then that can take up to 8 weeks for a decision on that sponsor license application. Companies do have the option to obtain a priority service. So you can pay an additional £500 on top of the application fee, and then the Home Office will aim to make a decision within 10 working days instead of 8 weeks. So you've got the 8 weeks over 10 working days. Once that sponsor license is successful, you can assign a certificate of sponsorship to an individual straight away. And then obviously it depends how quickly that individual then submits their application. Once that individual submits theirs, that can take up to 3 weeks from outside the UK or up to 8 weeks from inside the UK. So you're probably looking at 3 to 4 months for the process, unless you do use the priority services. And we've got another one. So does the position have to be advertised publicly before you can sponsor somebody for it? So previously, before the Home Office introduced the skilled worker visa, there was mandatory advertising. So you had to advertise a position for at least 28 days in 2 different places. So that used to be called the resident labour market test. So usually when people are Googling about the work visas, that still comes up from the past. So people sometimes still think you do have to advertise. The Home Office removed that requirement when they introduced the skilled worker visa back in, I think it's 2021 now, 2020, when they introduced the skilled worker visa. So they removed the mandatory requirement. However, it is still sometimes a good idea to advertise that. The Home Office will still require you to keep records of applications that you've received for the job, or interview notes from interviews you've carried out. So even though it's not mandatory, they do still require you to keep records of your attempts at hiring. Let's have a look for some more. So we've got a couple of questions about time frames. So hopefully I've clarified all those. There's another one. So what about an individual with pre-settle status coming from 2022? So obviously any EU national with pre-settle status, as long as that's not lapsed for any reason, then they do have the right to work. So they wouldn't require sponsorship. So their pre-settle status would give them the right to work. So any company would do a right to work check on the individual. and make sure they do still have the right to work. But they wouldn't need sponsorship if they've got pre-settled status. So there's another one here. So I think, is it Alvaro, Jose? So if a company is unsure how many certificates that you need for workers, is it better to apply for more than you need or less? So with anything with requesting certificates of sponsorship, you do have to justify how many you need to the Home Office. So in some cases, you may request 12 certificates, for example, but you've not justified to the Home Office that you need 12. So they would actually grant you less because they don't believe that you need that many anyway. So it's probably the latter. It's better to just err on the side of caution and just apply for less than rather than apply for more, because chances are the Home Office wouldn't grant you that higher amount anyway because you've not demonstrated to them that you do need those. Um, so if somebody submitted an application for care worker visa after the 11th of March, can they apply for a dependent visa? So if it was after, then no. So any care worker visa granted after that point, sorry, any application made after that date, then no, they just can't sponsor dependents. If they did have a child born in the UK, then that would be different. If the child's born in the UK, they could be granted in line with them. So there's quite a few coming in. I'll just scroll down these. Yeah, so we've got an interesting question from Rene. So I have a I have a group structure with a holding company and sub companies. I have the sponsorship only for one of my group companies. Can I extend it to all? So when you do have a main holding company and different branches within the UK, you have two options. So you can obtain one license for the main overall company, and then you add each individual company as a branch on that license. So you can actually manage everything within the one license. Um, so to answer your question, Renee, yeah, you could do that. You could have that one license, and then you could have all of the others listed as branches within it. The alternative is that each branch can hold its own license. So depending on your setup and your management of each company, some companies prefer to do it that way, and each individual branch have their own and manage their own license. So you can do it either way. Um, so yeah, there's an anonymous question. So what if we wanted to offer a work placement to somebody from Ukraine? I guess this can apply to any country really. So what if we wanted to offer a work placement to somebody from Ukraine? If they got on well, we would like to then offer a job at the end of it. Is this possible, and how would we go about this? So unfortunately, there's no visa for work placements, so it's not possible to trial somebody. You would have to be sponsoring them for the role from the outset. So there's no type of visa to have somebody on a trial period. Um, so yeah, unfortunately, it would be a case of you'd need to be sure about the individual and sponsor them under the skilled work route to begin with. And from Alba, so should we do the same process for someone who currently has their visa sponsored by another company? So yeah, so any time you want to sponsor somebody, if they're switching from another company, and they've already got a skilled worker visa, you do have to obtain, sorry, start again. So you do need to assign them a certificate of sponsorship, and they would need to make a new skilled worker application. So it's not like the visa they've currently got would transfer over to your company. They would need a new certificate of sponsorship, and they would need to submit another skilled worker application themselves. So this would apply even if, for example, they had a 3-year visa with the company they currently work for, and they'd only been working for them for 6 months, and then you wanted to sponsor them. Even though they've only been on that visa for 6 months, they would still need to make a new application to switch over the sponsorship to your company. So yeah, any time you change to another company, you would need to make a new application. It's worth noting as well, so even if you're not switching company, but your role changes to the point where it would be under a different occupation code, you also need to make a new application at that point and have a new certificate at that point. So sometimes applies even when you're staying with the same company. So yeah, you just need to be careful that you are compliant and you are making a new application. So Mohammed Rahman has said that there were issues with certificates of sponsorship. So the Home Office was not issuing certificates for some time. And is that still the case? And why is there a delay? So the delay was because of the incoming changes. We we didn't particularly ever find out why there was a delay, whether it was due to the volume of requests they were getting, because obviously most companies were trying to get those requests in to beat the changes. They wanted those certificates to be able to assign before the changes came in. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that the Home Office were delaying things until the changes came in. We're not 100% sure which which one that actually was. Things are getting better now. So there's not as much a delay with the certificate of sponsorship requests. What we are finding more though is that the Home Office are requesting more information from companies when you make a request. So we find it a lot with care companies, to be honest. So if you've requested a certificate of sponsorship to sponsor a care worker, instead of just assessing what was submitted, the Home Office will request things like contracts and rotas, that kind of detailed information to show that you need to fill this role. So things are still delayed, but that's mostly because they're requesting more information when you make the request. So yeah, we're still not fully back down to that one working day for a decision. So the Home Office are being more strict with it.
Well,
Uh,
we are
Sorry,
finishing now. I don't know if you want to answer like one more that you had there, or
no, it's okay.
okay. So, well, thank you again, Jason, and of course, Ayas for collaborating with us today. It was a fantastic session. Like it was a highly requested topic, and as we said, I'm going to send all the details for Jason and for Ayas, so you can reach them directly if you have like more concrete questions about the immigration services. And just to finish, as we do have some members and non-members here with us today, I encourage you to visit our website and contact any colleagues of the chamber to know more about us. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.